Curtis, at 39 years old, earned a respectable $68,000 a year as a city building inspector for Raleigh, North Carolina. It was a solid, dependable job that he was good at, a job that required precision, integrity, and a deep understanding of how things were built. He found a quiet satisfaction in the clean lines of a well-framed wall and the solid thud of a door settling perfectly into its jamb. But on this sweltering Saturday afternoon, in late July, standing in the meticulously landscaped backyard of a sprawling North Hills home, he felt anything but solid or precise. He felt flimsy, transparent, and acutely aware of the $89 Timex on his wrist, while his father-in-law, Robert, sported a Rolex that cost more than Curtis's 2012 Toyota Camry. The air, thick with the smell of hickory smoke from a $4,000 Traeger grill, felt heavy and hard to breathe. This was his wife Dana's family home, or rather her parents' investment property, the one they had graciously allowed Dana and Curtis to live in, rent-free, for the past 3 years. The BBQ was an annual tradition, a gathering of Robert and Eleanor's affluent friends, a parade of pastel-colored polo shirts and expensive linen dresses. Curtis had always felt like an exhibit at these events, the working-class husband brought in for show. He was refilling a bowl with a $15 bag of artisanal potato chips when he heard his mother-in-law's voice, sharp and clear, cut through the low hum of conversation. Eleanor, a woman whose deep brown skin was always framed by perfectly coiffed silver hair and adorned with no less than $10,000 in diamond jewelry, was speaking to her friend, a woman in a $900 Lilly Pulitzer sundress. "It's just been a godsend, having this house for Dana," Eleanor said, her voice carrying a tone of performative generosity. "With Curtis's situation, it gives her a stable foundation, a beautiful home she deserves." The friend nodded sympathetically. "It must be a comfort for you to provide that." Then came the blow. It was delivered by his wife, Dana. His wife, whose elegant braids were woven with shimmering gold thread, whose laughter he used to think was the most beautiful sound in the world. She walked over to her mother, linking her arm through Eleanor's. She glanced over at Curtis, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, before turning back to the conversation. "Oh, we're just grateful," Dana said, her voice light and casual, a sound that completely belied the devastating weight of her words. She gestured vaguely in his direction with her free hand, the one not displaying her $15,000 engagement ring. "It's not like we could afford a place like this in North Hills on our own. We all know who the poor one is here." A small, cruel laugh escaped her lips, echoed by her mother. The words hung in the humid air, seeming to silence the cicadas in the ancient oak trees, the poor one. It wasn't just an insult, it was a public declaration, a verdict delivered in front of her parents' circle of influence, a room full of people who measured a man's worth by the digits on his tax return. Curtis felt the blood drain from his face, the bag of chips crinkled in his grip. He looked at his wife, the woman he had loved for 7 years, the woman for whom he had poured not just his heart but his entire life savings into this very house, and he saw a stranger. A stranger who was using his perceived financial modesty as a punchline to elevate her own status. He had no idea in that moment of crushing humiliation that his salvation was just a few feet away, on the other side of a perfectly manicured boxwood hedge. Have you ever been made to feel small by the people who are supposed to lift you up? It's a pain that cuts deeper than any stranger's insult, and for Curtis, this was just the beginning of a story that would redefine what it meant to be rich. Let us know in the comments if you've ever had to prove your worth to someone who should have already known it. The facade of their life had been built as carefully as any structure Curtis had ever inspected. It looked perfect from the outside. They had met 7 years prior at a jazz festival in downtown Raleigh. Curtis, with his easy smile and neatly twisted locks that framed his handsome face, had been captivated by Dana, a project manager for a tech firm whose radiant, deep brown skin seemed to glow under the festival lights. She was ambitious, sharp, and laughed at his jokes about load-bearing walls and city codes. He made $55,000 a year back then, and she made nearly double that. It never seemed to matter. Their love felt like its own economy, rich in affection and shared dreams. They married 2 years later in a simple ceremony at the Raleigh Municipal Rose Garden, surrounded by close friends and family. Curtis wore a $400 navy blue suit he'd bought at a local department store. Dana was stunning in a classic off-the-rack gown that cost $1,200. His family, a warm and boisterous crew from Southeast Raleigh, celebrated with unreserved joy. Her parents, Robert and Eleanor, were more restrained. They hosted the rehearsal dinner at the Capitol Club, a private establishment downtown where the bill likely exceeded the cost of Curtis's entire wedding budget. During the dinner, Robert, a real estate developer with a portfolio worth millions, had clapped Curtis on the back. "Welcome to the family, son," he'd said, his voice smooth as bourbon. "You take care of our girl. She's used to a certain standard." It sounded like a welcome, but it felt like a warning. For the first 2 years of their marriage, they lived in Curtis's modest 1,100 square foot bungalow that he owned outright. It was in a quiet, older neighborhood, and he'd spent years lovingly restoring it himself. He'd rebuilt the front porch, refinished the original hardwood floors, and planted a garden full of tomatoes and herbs in the backyard. Dana had called it charming and cozy, but he could see the way her eyes would scan the small rooms, the way she'd sigh when a friend from her North Hills social circle came to visit. Then came the offer. Robert and Eleanor had purchased a property in North Hills, a 1980s-era brick colonial, on a half-acre lot for what Robert called a steal, at $450,000. The bones were good, but it was dated. The plan, he explained over a $300 dinner at a steakhouse, was to renovate it and flip it. "But we had another idea," Eleanor had said, placing her manicured hand over Dana's. "What if you two lived there? Oversee the renovation? Make it your own? It would be our gift to you, a proper start." Dana's eyes had lit up. "Oh, Daddy, really?" Robert leaned back, swirling the $80 glass of Cabernet in his hand. "Of course. There's a catch, though. We'll cover the mortgage, but the renovation budget is on you. Think of it as sweat equity. And Curtis," he said, turning his gaze on him, "with your background, you could manage the whole thing. Save a fortune on a general contractor. It's a win-win. You get to live in $1 million home, and we have our daughter in a safe, beautiful neighborhood." Curtis had felt a knot of unease. He knew exactly what a renovation of that scale cost. He had about $150,000 in savings, a combination of careful investing and the inheritance from his late mother. It was his entire nest egg. "Robert, that's a lot of work and a lot of money," Curtis had said carefully. "A project like this could easily run over $100,000. "Exactly," Robert boomed. "And when it's done, the house will be worth double. You'll be living in an asset that's appreciating every day. It's the smartest financial move you could ever make. You're building your future right here." Dana had turned to him, her eyes pleading. "Please, Curtis? It would be our dream home. Think of the parties we could have. Think of the space. My parents are being so generous." And so, against his better judgment, he agreed. The word they used was our dream home, our future, our equity. So he drained his savings account. The first check he wrote was for $22,000 to a demolition crew to gut the kitchen and 2 bathrooms. He spent weekends and evenings after his city job creating detailed architectural plans. He pulled every single permit under his own name using his inspector's license and credentials, a professional risk that tied him inextricably to the quality and safety of the work. He became the de facto general contractor. He negotiated with subcontractors, his practical knowledge saving them tens of thousands. He paid for the materials directly from his account. The $18,000 for the custom cabinetry in the kitchen. The $7,500 for the high-end Bosch appliance package. The $11,000 for the wide plank oak flooring that flowed through the first floor. He installed the intricate tile backsplash in the kitchen himself over 3 weekends. A painstaking job that cost $1,200 in materials, but would have cost $5,000 in labor. Dana was thrilled with the aesthetic results. She picked out the finishes, pointing to pictures in a $75 interior design magazine. A $4,500 slab of Italian marble for the island, a $3,000 freestanding tub for the master bathroom that required Curtis to reroute the plumbing himself. He remembered the day the marble was installed. Dana had clapped her hands together. "It's perfect. It looks just like the one in the magazine." She'd kissed him on the cheek. "You're amazing." He worked tirelessly. His hands, usually busy with clipboards and code books, were now perpetually calloused and dusted with drywall. He lost weight. He'd come home from his 8-hour day at the city and put in another 6 at the North Hills house. In total, he documented every expense. The final tally came to $132,450. It was almost every penny he had. When they finally moved in, the house was unrecognizable. It was a showpiece. Dana was ecstatic. "We did it, baby," she'd said, throwing her arms around him in the gleaming new foyer under a $2,000 designer chandelier she'd picked out. But even then, a subtle shift began. When her friends came over, she'd give the tour. "I found this amazing marble," she'd say. "I knew this layout would be so much better for entertaining." Her language slowly erased him. It went from "we did it" to "I designed it," with a footnote that Curtis helped with the practical stuff. The facade was complete, a beautiful couple in a beautiful home, the picture of success. But the foundation, Curtis was beginning to realize, was built on a lie. The cruelty wasn't a sudden flood. It was a slow, rising tide. The escalating betrayal began with small, almost imperceptible digs that grew into overt acts of disrespect. In the months leading up to that fateful BBQ, Curtis's role in their shared life and in the creation of their home was systematically diminished, not just by Dana's parents, but by Dana herself. The first major crack appeared about a year after they moved in. Robert and Eleanor were over for their weekly Sunday dinner, a ritual Curtis had come to dread. They were seated in the dining room, at a $6,000 table Dana had insisted they needed, surrounded by the fruits of Curtis's labor and savings. Robert was holding court, talking about a new commercial development his company was financing. "The numbers are staggering," he said, taking a sip of wine, "but you have to spend money to make money. It's about leveraging capital, something you can't do with a city pension." He looked directly at Curtis, a patronizing smile on his face. "No offense, Curtis. It's an honorable job, but it's not a wealth-building engine, is it? It's a good thing this house was a gift. Gives you two a leg up you'd never have otherwise." Curtis felt his jaw tighten. He wanted to say, "This house wasn't a gift. I paid for this floor you're sitting on. I paid for the walls around you." He looked to Dana, expecting her to intervene, to defend him, to defend their partnership. Instead, she just gave a tight, uncomfortable smile and reached for the wine bottle. "Dad, let's not talk about finances," she said, her tone placating. "Can I get you some more wine?" It wasn't a defense, it was a diversion. It was a choice, to appease her father rather than support her husband. In the silence that followed, Curtis felt a profound sense of isolation. He was a guest in a home he had built. The snide remarks became a regular feature of every family gathering. Eleanor, in her own passive-aggressive way, was just as cutting. She'd walk through the house, running a hand over a newly painted wall. "This color is lovely, Dana. You have such expensive taste. It's a good thing you don't have to worry about a budget in this house." Every compliment to Dana was an implicit insult to Curtis, a reminder of his perceived inability to provide for her at the level she deserved. The situation escalated when Dana's spending habits began to change. With no rent or mortgage to pay, and her own substantial six-figure salary, she had an enormous amount of disposable income. But instead of contributing to their joint savings or offering to reimburse Curtis for any part of the renovation, she began to indulge in luxury goods with an almost frantic energy. One Tuesday evening, she came home with a triumphant look on her face, carrying a distinctive beige shopping bag. She pulled out a $3,800 Chanel handbag. "Look what I got," she announced, placing it on the marble kitchen island he had paid for. Curtis stared at the bag. It cost more than his entire emergency fund now. "Dana," he said, his voice quiet, "that's a lot of money. We were supposed to be rebuilding our savings together." She scoffed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Our savings? Curtis, I work hard. This is my money. I'm not asking you to pay for it." "But the agreement was that my investment in the house freed up our collective income," he argued, trying to keep his voice steady. "We were supposed to be a team. That money could have gone into an investment account. It could have been the start of replenishing what I spent on this place." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she snapped, her face hardening. "Don't start acting like a martyr about the house. You're living in $1 million home for free. I think that's a pretty good return on your investment, don't you? You should be thanking me and my parents, not nickel and diming me over a handbag." The word martyr struck him like a physical blow. He had never once complained about the money or the work. He had done it out of love for her, for the future he thought they were building. To have that love reframed as a transaction, and a transaction in which he was already the winner, was devastating. He saw then that she didn't view his contribution as a sacrifice or a partnership. She saw it as the price of admission into her world. The ultimate betrayal of their partnership came a few weeks before the BBQ. They were having a rare, quiet evening at home, watching some generic reality show on their $3,000 flat-screen TV. A commercial for a financial planning service came on. "We should probably do that one day," Curtis said, trying to broach the subject of their future. "Think about retirement, long-term goals." Dana muted the TV. She turned to him, her expression serious. "I have been thinking about it," she said. "I had lunch with my father's financial advisor last week." Curtis was taken aback. "You did? Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't want to worry you," she said, a line that was clearly designed to sound considerate but felt deeply condescending. "He was just helping me map out a 5-year plan for my portfolio and my assets." "Your assets?" Curtis asked. "You mean our assets, right?" Dana took a deep breath, and her next words were chosen with chilling precision. "Well, primarily, my assets, my salary, my inheritance from Nana, and of course, this house." Curtis felt the air leave his lungs. "Dana, this house? We built this house together. I put over $130,000 into it." "You contributed to the renovation?" she corrected him, her voice cool and detached. "And we're all very grateful for that. It allowed you to live here. But the property itself belongs to my parents. It's part of their estate, and it will eventually be mine." That's the reality, Curtis. When we talk about long-term financial planning, we have to be realistic about what's mine, what's my family's, and what you're able to contribute. There it was. The final brutal erasure. His life savings, his professional license, his sweat and blood, all reduced to a contribution that granted him the privilege of temporary residence. He wasn't her partner. He was a long-term tenant who had paid his rent in a lump sum. The outrage that had been simmering for months boiled over inside him, but on the outside, he went very, very still. He looked at the woman he married sitting in the beautiful room he had built for them, and he knew with a certainty that was as cold and hard as the marble in their kitchen that his marriage was over. The only thing left to do was figure out how to reclaim what was his. The sting of Dana's words, "We all know who the poor one is here," propelled Curtis out of the backyard. He walked through the house, past clusters of laughing guests who now seemed like figures in a dream, their voices distant and muffled. He didn't stop until he was in the front yard, the manicured lawn stretching out before him like a green, unforgiving sea. The sun was relentless, beating down on the quiet street. He needed air, but each breath felt like inhaling fire. He leaned against the cool brick of the house, the very bricks he'd paid to have repointed for $2,800, and tried to steady himself. He heard a gentle snipping sound nearby. He looked over and saw his next-door neighbor, Marcus Thorne, tending to his rose bushes. Marcus was a man in his late 60s, retired, with a crown of perfectly white hair that stood in striking contrast to his smooth, dark skin. He was a pillar of the neighborhood, a man whose garden had won local awards and whose quiet dignity commanded respect. He was wearing simple gardening gloves and a well-worn straw hat, meticulously pruning a vibrant red rose. Marcus glanced up, his eyes sharp and intelligent, taking in Curtis's posture, the tension in his shoulders, the bleak look on his face. He had been close enough to the patio to overhear the exchange. The wind had carried Dana's high, clear voice perfectly across the hedge. "Tough crowd in there," Marcus said, his voice a low, comforting rumble. He didn't offer pity, just a simple statement of fact. Curtis just shook his head, unable to form words. He felt a wave of shame wash over him, so intense it was nauseating. To be humiliated like that was one thing. To have it witnessed was another. Marcus continued his pruning, giving Curtis a moment to compose himself. "That wife of yours has her mother's tongue," he observed, snipping a dead leaf with surgical precision. "Sharp and not always kind." He paused, then turned to face Curtis more directly. "I know who you are. You're Curtis, the building inspector. You signed off on my kitchen permit about 3 years back before you moved in here." Curtis blinked, surprised. "You remember that?" "I remember you were thorough," Marcus said with a nod. "Made the contractor redo some of the wiring behind the wall. Said it wasn't up to code. He was mad as a hornet. But you wouldn't budge. You said, 'The code is there to keep people safe, not to make things easy.' I respected that, a man of principle. The memory, so distant and professional, felt like a lifeline in that moment. It was a reminder of a part of himself he had almost forgotten, the competent, authoritative professional who held people to account. Seeing that Curtis was still struggling, Marcus set down his shears. He walked over to the edge of his property, leaning against the low stone wall that separated their yards. "Son, I'm going to step out of my lane here, so you tell me if I'm out of line." "But I heard what she said. And I've seen you working on this house for 3 years. I saw the crews coming and going. I saw you out here on weekends, covered in dust, long after the workers went home. That house," he said, gesturing with his head toward the brick colonial, "that house didn't renovate itself." A dam inside Curtis broke. The humiliation gave way to a surge of raw, agonizing truth. "I paid for it," he said, the words choked and quiet. "All of it. The kitchen, the bathrooms, the floors, the damn roof. $132,000. My mother's inheritance. Everything I had." Marcus listened, his expression unchanging, but his eyes filled with a deep, knowing focus. He didn't offer platitudes or condolences. He asked a practical, powerful question. Whose name is on the permits for all that work? Curtis looked up, confused by the question. Mine, of course. I had to pull them to get the work done legally. It's my job. And whose professional license is registered with the city for every single one of those inspections and approvals? Marcus pressed, his voice becoming more incisive. Mine, Curtis repeated, the answer obvious to him. It's tied to my inspector's certification. Marcus nodded slowly, a small, grim smile touching his lips. It wasn't a smile of humor, but of recognition. The recognition of a fatal mistake made by the opposition. So let me get this straight, he said, his voice dropping as if he were laying out a legal argument. Your name and your name alone is on every official city document authorizing, inspecting, and approving the structural and systemic transformation of that property. You didn't just write checks, Curtis. You professionally sanctioned the work. You assumed the legal liability for it. A light began to dawn in the fog of Curtis's pain. He had seen these situations from the other side 100 times. He'd seen contractors place liens on properties for unpaid work. He knew the power of official paperwork, but he had never, ever imagined applying that knowledge to his own life, his own home, his own wife. They think you're the poor one, Marcus said, his voice laced with a fine, cold anger on Curtis's behalf. They think your contribution was just cash, easily dismissed. They've forgotten that you are the city's authority on that property. You aren't just the money, son, you're the gatekeeper. You hold the official record. He let the words sink in. Curtis straightened up, the slump in his shoulders disappearing. The shame was being replaced by something else, something hard and clear. It was the birth of a strategy. What do I do? Curtis asked, his voice now steady. Marcus picked up his shears again, his point made. You go back to your office on Monday morning and you gather the evidence, every permit application, every inspection report you signed, every certificate of completion, and you find every single receipt and bank statement for the $132,000 you spent. You put it all together in a folder. Because paper doesn't have emotions. Paper doesn't get humiliated. Paper just tells the truth. Curtis looked from Marcus's wise, calm face to the imposing house behind him. It no longer looked like a monument to his failure. It looked like an asset, tied down by a web of documents, all of which bore his name. He was not the poor one. He was the one with the proof. Returning to the party was one of the hardest things Curtis had ever done. He walked back onto the patio, his face a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. The laughter sounded harsh now, the conversations vapid. Dana glanced at him, a flicker of guilt, or perhaps annoyance in her eyes, but she was quickly absorbed back into a conversation with a woman wearing a gaudy diamond tennis bracelet. He picked up a plastic cup, filled it with water, and stood by the grill, projecting an image of calm he was nowhere near feeling. He was playing dumb. And it was the performance of a lifetime. For the next 3 weeks, Curtis lived in a state of suspended animation. He was a ghost in his own life, an actor playing the part of the dutiful husband, while the real Curtis was methodically plotting his exit. The house, once a source of pride and then of pain, now felt like a temporary holding cell. Every expensive object, every polished surface was no longer a home, but a piece of evidence in a case he was building against his own wife. One evening, Dana came into the home office he'd built in a converted spare bedroom. He was at the desk pretending to read a novel. She was scrolling through her phone. "Babe, I was thinking," she said, not looking up, "for the fall party, we should really get that new Sonos outdoor sound system. It's only about $1,500. It would make the patio so much more professional." A month ago, he would have argued. He would have brought up their budget, the need to save. Now he just nodded. "Okay," he said, his voice flat. "If you think we need it." She looked up, surprised by his easy compliance. "Oh, great. I'll order it tomorrow." She smiled, a relieved, slightly confused expression on her face. She thought she was winning. She had no idea he had already conceded the battle for the marriage and was now planning the war for his assets and his dignity. The next day at his office in the Raleigh Municipal Building, he didn't eat lunch. He used his hour to go deep into the city's digital archives. His fingers flew across the keyboard with a calm, cold precision. He entered the address of the North Hills house. File after file appeared on his screen, a digital breadcrumb trail of his own making. Permit number ELEC-2021-00894. Full electrical rewiring. Applicant Curtis Miller. License number 7432. Approved. Permit number PLUM-2021-01123. Master bathroom and kitchen plumbing overhaul. Applicant Curtis Miller. License number 7432. Approved. Permit number BLD-2022-00451. Structural changes to load-bearing walls. Applicant Curtis Miller. License number 7432. Approved. He printed every single document. The initial applications, the inspection schedules, his own notes written in the margins, and the final stamped certificates of completion. Each page was a testament, a legal record of his authority and involvement. He then went through his online banking portal going back 3 years. He downloaded and printed every statement that showed a transfer to a contractor, every debit card purchase from Home Depot and Lowe's, a $4,200 charge for Pella windows, a $6,800 payment to a roofing company, a $3,100 bill for a new HVAC unit. He laid all the papers out on an empty desk in a quiet corner of the office. The stack was nearly 3 inches thick. He sorted them chronologically, the permits first, then the corresponding invoices and bank statements. The final page was a simple spreadsheet he created, itemizing every single expense. The total at the bottom read $132,450.37. He 3-hole punched the entire stack and placed it into a crisp, new 3-inch binder. He didn't use a flimsy manila folder. He used a heavy-duty binder, the kind an attorney would use for a major case. It felt substantial. It felt real. That evening, he was in the garage, supposedly organizing his tools, when Dana came out. The new $1,500 Sonos system had arrived, and the boxes were on the floor. "Can you help me set this up this weekend?" she asked. "Sure," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked at her beautiful face, and felt a pang of something that might have been sadness, but it was distant, like a memory of a pain, not the pain itself. He was detached, observing her, observing himself. He was gathering data, not just on paper, but in his mind. He cataloged her casual dismissal of him, her complete lack of awareness that the ground beneath her feet was about to give way. The charade was exhausting. He'd sit through dinners with her, listening to her talk about her work, her friends, her plans for her house. He'd nod and smile, the perfect, supportive, slightly dim husband she now believed him to be. She mistook his silence for acceptance, his calm for defeat. She had made a critical mistake. She had underestimated him. She thought he was the poor one because he didn't wear his wealth on his wrist or boast about it at parties. She failed to understand that Curtis's power wasn't in what he owned. It was in what he knew. And what he knew, all carefully organized in a binder hidden in the trunk of his 2012 Toyota Camry, was enough to bring their carefully constructed world crashing down. He was just waiting for the right moment. He needed to be strategic. He needed an ally, and he knew just the man to call, the man who had planted the seed of this entire strategy in his mind, right next to his award-winning roses. The following Saturday, Curtis called Marcus. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice steady, "it's Curtis Miller from next door. I was wondering if I could buy you a cup of coffee. I have that paperwork you suggested, I gather." "I'd like that very much, Curtis," Marcus replied, his tone warm but serious. "Meet me at the Morning Times on Fayetteville Street in an hour. My treat." The Morning Times was a bustling coffee shop in the heart of downtown Raleigh, filled with the aroma of roasted coffee and the low murmur of conversations. It felt a world away from the sterile perfection of North Hills. Curtis arrived first, clutching the heavy binder to his chest. He chose a small, secluded table in the back. When Marcus arrived, he wasn't in his gardening attire. He wore a sharp, tailored blazer, a crisp button-down shirt, and a pair of expensive-looking leather shoes. He looked every bit the retired litigator he was. "That's a formidable-looking binder," Marcus said, sitting down as Curtis handed it to him. For the next 30 minutes, Marcus went through the documents in silence. He didn't skim. He read every page with an intense, focused concentration that Curtis had only ever seen in movies about lawyers. He examined the permit numbers, Curtis's signature, the city seals. He cross-referenced the invoices with the bank statements. His expression was neutral, but Curtis could see a flicker of approval in his eyes. Finally, Marcus closed the binder and pushed it gently back across the table. He looked at Curtis, his gaze direct. "This is more than airtight, Curtis. This is a fortress." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You have to understand what you've done here, from a legal perspective. You didn't just give them money. A gift of money can be argued about, dismissed as a familial contribution. What you did was perform a professional service and tie it directly to the property with official, unimpeachable government documents. And you funded the materials for that service. In the eyes of the law, you acted as the primary contractor for the improvement of a real estate asset." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "That gives you a very specific, very powerful remedy. It's called a mechanic's lien." Curtis nodded. "I know what they are. I've seen contractors file them. It stops the owner from selling the property until the contractor is paid." "It does more than that," Marcus corrected. "It clouds the title. The property cannot be sold. It cannot be refinanced, and you cannot secure a home equity line of credit against it until the lien is satisfied. It essentially freezes the asset. And if they refuse to pay, you can, in due course, force the sale of the house to get your money. You are not a guest in that house, Curtis. You are a primary creditor." The word creditor felt like a suit of armor. It was a powerful, impersonal term that swept away all the emotional baggage of husband, son-in-law, and the poor one. "So what's the next step?" Curtis asked, feeling a surge of adrenaline. The victim was gone. The strategist was in command. "The next step is to make it official," Marcus said. "You need a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but one who specializes in construction law and real estate litigation. Filing the lien is a precise process. One mistake in the paperwork can get it thrown out." He pulled a small leather-bound notebook and a pen from his blazer. He wrote down a name and a number. "Her name is Anita Hayes. She's a shark, the best in the business. Her firm is on the top floor of the Wells Fargo building. She charges $650 an hour, and she's worth every penny. Tell her Marcus Thorne sent you. She owes me a favor." He slid the piece of paper across the table. "Go see her on Monday. She will file the lien for you. It will be recorded with the County Register of Deeds. It will be a public record. And then," Marcus said, leaning back, "you wait for the right moment to inform them that their most valuable asset is no longer under their control." Curtis took the paper. Anita Hayes, $650 per hour. The price was steep, But for the first time in years, it felt like an investment in himself, not in Dana or her family. "And what do I do in the meantime?" Curtis asked. "How do I keep acting normal?" "You don't have to act much longer," Marcus said with a grim smile. "Just a little while. Let them have one more party. Let them bask in the glory of their beautiful home. Pride, as they say, comes before the fall." The meeting with Anita Hayes was exactly as Marcus had predicted. She was a formidable black woman in her 50s, dressed in an $8,700 Armani suit, her office offering a panoramic view of the city. She reviewed the binder with the same meticulous attention as Marcus, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Miller," she said after a long silence, "this is the cleanest pre-litigation file I have ever seen. Your documentation is flawless." She looked at him, a hint of admiration in her professional demeanor. "We will file the notice of lien with Wake County tomorrow morning. It will be for the full amount of $132,450.37. It will be effective immediately. The cost for the filing and my initial retainer will be $5,000. Curtis didn't hesitate. He pulled out the credit card he had opened just for this purpose. "Let's do it." As he left her glass tower office and stepped out into the bright Raleigh sunshine, he felt a sense of calm he hadn't experienced in years. The plan was in motion. The trap was set. All that was left was the strike. The opportunity presented itself 2 weeks later. Dana, oblivious to the legal storm gathering just over the horizon, was in a flurry of excitement. Her parents were hosting their annual summer soiree, a more formal and exclusive affair than the casual family BBQ. This was a catered event, designed to impress Robert's business partners and their country club friends. It was the grand unveiling of the fully completed renovation, the culmination of what they saw as their vision and investment. The evening of the party was perfect, almost cruelly so. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak trees, and the setting sun cast a warm, golden glow over the immaculate backyard. String lights, the ones Curtis had spent an entire Sunday installing, twinkled over the patio. A catering staff in crisp white uniforms moved silently among the guests, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres on silver trays. The air was filled with the sounds of soft jazz and polite, wealthy laughter. Dana was in her element. She wore a stunning, backless red dress that had cost $2,400, her hair swept up in an elegant style. She moved through the crowd with a radiant smile, accepting compliments on the house. "Oh, thank you," she'd say. It was a labor of love, but the results were worth it. Curtis was a ghost at the feast. He had dressed simply, in a well-fitting but modest $300 Navy suit he'd owned for years. He nursed a single glass of sparkling water, watching the scene unfold with a chilling sense of detachment. He saw his father-in-law, Robert, holding court by the new outdoor fireplace, a $7,000 addition Dana had called non-negotiable. Robert, puffed up with pride in his $4,000 Xenia suit, was pontificating to a small group of investors. "It's all about vision," Robert said, gesturing expansively at the house. "You see a property like this, you have to see the potential. We turned a dated relic into a modern masterpiece. It's a testament to what our family can accomplish." This was the moment. As if on cue, Curtis felt a slight vibration from the phone in his pocket. It was a text from Marcus. It contained a single word: ready. Curtis made his way to the edge of the patio, positioning himself where he had a clear view of both Robert and the front driveway. He felt his heart beating a steady, heavy rhythm. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about justice. It was about accountability. A few minutes later, a figure appeared at the end of the long, stone-paved driveway. It was Marcus Thorne. He wasn't dressed as a gardener or a casual neighbor. He was dressed in the same impeccable style as when Curtis had met him for coffee. A dark, perfectly tailored suit, a silver tie, and polished black shoes. He walked with a calm, deliberate authority, carrying a simple, professional-looking leather portfolio. He didn't sneak in. He walked directly toward the hub of the party, his path taking him right to Robert's group. The guests quieted as he approached, his dignified presence demanding their attention. Robert turned, a flicker of annoyance on his face at the interruption. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone brusque. "Robert," Marcus said, his voice calm and clear, easily carrying in the sudden lull. "My apologies for the interruption. My name is Marcus Thorne. I live next door." Robert's expression relaxed slightly, recognizing him as a neighbor. "Ah, Marcus, good to see you. Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," Marcus replied smoothly. "I just have a delivery for you. I was asked to ensure it was placed directly in your hands." He opened the leather portfolio and slid out a single, thick folder. It wasn't the entire binder, just a curated selection of the most damning documents. Marcus didn't hand it to Curtis. He didn't even look at Curtis. He extended the folder directly to Robert. A confused murmur went through the crowd. Dana, seeing the interruption, began to walk over, her smile frozen on her face. "What's going on?" Robert took the folder, a look of bewilderment on his face. "A delivery? For me?" He opened the flap. The first page was a cover sheet, typed in a bold, clean font. Notice of mechanic's line filed against property at 421 Oakmont Drive. The close-up on Robert's face would have been cinematic. The jovial, confident mask crumbled in an instant. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving his deep brown skin looking ashen under the party lights. His eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed in fury. He frantically flipped to the next page, a copy of the officially recorded lien from the Wake County Register of Deeds, bearing a prominent county seal. The amount was clearly stated, $132,450.37. Claimant, Curtis Miller. Dana reached her father's side, peering over his shoulder. "Dad? What is it?" Her eyes scanned the document. Her breath hitched. The radiant smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She looked from the paper to Curtis, who stood 20 feet away watching them, his expression unreadable, his silence more powerful than any shout. Behind the lien notice were other documents, carefully chosen by Anita Hayes for maximum impact. A copy of the main building permit with Curtis's name and license number highlighted in yellow. A copy of the $22,000 invoice for demolition, marked paid in full from an account belonging to Curtis Miller. A copy of the $18,000 invoice for the custom cabinetry, also paid from his account. The silence on the patio was now absolute. The jazz music had faded out between songs. Every single guest was watching Robert and Dana. They saw Robert's hand tremble. They saw Dana's face go white. They saw her whisper a single desperate word. "Curtis?" Robert looked up, his eyes locking with Curtis's across the patio. The pretense, the condescension, the years of quiet humiliations, it all evaporated in this single, silent moment of reckoning. He had been publicly, quietly, and undeniably exposed. He wasn't a generous patriarch bestowing a gift. He was a debtor, legally and publicly beholden to the son-in-law he had so casually dismissed as the poor one. Curtis didn't say a word. He simply held Robert's gaze for a long moment, then turned and walked away, leaving the folder, the party, and the ruins of his marriage behind him. The collapse was not loud, but it was total. It began with a cascade of frantic, desperate messages, each one a snapshot of Dana's unraveling. Curtis, having already packed a bag he'd hidden in his car, drove to a modest extended-stay hotel near the airport, a $119 a night room that felt more like a sanctuary than the $1 million house he had just left. He turned his phone to silent but watched the notifications light up the screen. 9:47 p.m. Dana. Curtis, where are you? You need to come back here right now and explain this. This isn't funny. 9:51 p.m. Dana. Call me. My father is losing his mind. You have embarrassed me in front of everyone. How could you do this to us? 10:05 p.m. Dana. This is a mistake, right? Some kind of sick joke? You can't put a lien on our house. It's my parents' house. 10:23 p.m. Robert, from Dana's phone. You have made a grave mistake, boy. You will undo this immediately, or you will regret it. I will ruin you. 11:15 p.m. Dana. Please, Curtis, please, just come home. We can talk about this. I don't understand. I'm sorry. Whatever I said, I'm sorry. Just fix it. Please. 1:30 a.m. Dana. I can't believe you. After everything we've done for you. You are the most ungrateful man I have ever known. You've destroyed our family. I hate you. Curtis read the messages one by one and felt a profound, chilling emptiness. There was no apology for the years of disrespect, only anger at being held accountable. There was no recognition of his pain, only outrage at her own public humiliation. He deleted the thread and blocked her number, along with her parents. The first official consequence came 3 days later. A letter arrived at his post office box, which he had rented weeks ago. It was from a high-priced law firm in Charlotte, retained by Robert. The letter was full of blustering threats, calling the lien frivolous and without merit, and threatening a lawsuit for slander of title and emotional distress. It demanded the immediate removal of the lien. Curtis simply forwarded a scanned copy to Anita Hayes. Her response was swift and brutal. A letter was dispatched from her office back to Robert's lawyers. It included a copy of the entire binder of evidence and a short, 2-sentence paragraph. Our client's claim is meticulously documented and legally unassailable. We will not be removing the lien, and any countersuit will be met with a motion for sanctions against your firm for filing a frivolous lawsuit. The second consequence was financial, and it was devastating for Robert. As Marcus had predicted, the lien had clouded the title to the North Hills property. Robert and Eleanor had been in the final stages of securing a $250,000 home equity line of credit against the property's newly inflated value. They had planned to use the cash to invest in a speculative commercial real estate venture Robert was excited about. A week after the party, their loan officer from the bank called. The application was denied. The reason cited was the encumbrance on the title in the amount of $132,450.37. The deal Robert wanted in on was time-sensitive. Without the immediate capital, the opportunity was lost. The $250,000 they had been counting on vanished. The third consequence was social. The story of the summer soiree spread like wildfire through the tight-knit community of North Hills and the local country club. The narrative, however, wasn't the one Robert and Dana would have wanted. Marcus, a respected figure, had been a key witness. The truth, in its most embarrassing form, became common knowledge. The wealthy developer and his wife had exploited their working-class son-in-law, who had then cleverly and legally outmaneuvered them. The whispers followed them everywhere. They were uninvited from a prestigious charity gala they chaired every year. Friends suddenly became unavailable for golf or lunch. The public image they had so carefully cultivated was shattered. The final consequence was the inevitable capitulation. After 2 weeks of silence from Robert's lawyers, a new letter arrived at Anita Hayes' office. It was a single page, the tone stripped of all arrogance. It stated that their client, Robert, was prepared to satisfy the lien in full in exchange for its immediate removal. Anita called Curtis. "They folded?" she said, a note of triumph in her voice. "They have no other move. Do you accept?" Yes, Curtis said without hesitation. A week later, a cashier's check, drawn from a brokerage account and representing a significant chunk of Robert and Eleanor's retirement savings, was delivered by courier to Anita Hayes's firm. The amount was for the full $132,450.37. The law firm took its contingency fee, and the remaining balance, a sum of $118,205, was wired directly into a new bank account Curtis had opened. The same day, Dana served him with divorce papers. He signed them without contest, agreeing to a clean break with no further claims from either side. He was free. The money in his account wasn't a profit. It was a reclamation. It was the return of his past and the key to his future. Is getting your money back the same as getting justice? For Curtis, the financial victory was only part of the equation. The real win was the restoration of his self-worth. Share your thoughts on what true justice looks like after a deep betrayal. 1 year later, the sun, a welcome presence, streamed down on a quiet street in the historic Oakwood neighborhood of Raleigh. The oppressive humidity of the previous summer had been replaced by a pleasant, breezy warmth. Here the houses weren't sprawling mansions but charming, century-old bungalows with wide front porches and vibrant gardens. The atmosphere wasn't one of competitive wealth, but of quiet community. Curtis was on the front porch of his new home, a modest but beautifully maintained 1920s duplex. He was wearing a worn t-shirt, faded jeans, and a leather tool belt. His locks were tied back as he carefully sanded a section of the porch railing, the scent of fresh sawdust mingling with the sweet smell of jasmine from a nearby trellis. He had purchased the property for $350,000 using the $118,205 he'd recovered as a substantial down payment. He lived in the spacious downstairs unit and rented the upstairs apartment to a young graduate student for $1,400 a month. The rental income covered nearly his entire mortgage. For the first time in his adult life, he was building true, sustainable wealth, his own. He heard the familiar sound of footsteps on the sidewalk and looked up to see Marcus Thorne walking toward him, carrying a small cooler. Marcus had become more than a neighbor. He was a mentor and a true friend. "Thought you might be thirsty," Marcus said, setting the cooler down and pulling out 2 bottles of a local craft beer. He handed one to Curtis. "How's that railing coming along?" "Almost done," Curtis said, taking a long, refreshing sip of the cold beer. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand and leaned against the post, a feeling of deep, uncomplicated contentment settling over him. "It's good to be working with my hands on something that's actually mine." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the world go by. A neighbor walked past with her dog and waved. Curtis waved back, calling her by name. He was a part of this place. "Heard through the grapevine that your old house in North Hills finally sold," Marcus said casually. Curtis nodded. He'd seen the listing online. After paying him, Robert and Eleanor had no more capital or desire to hold on to the property. They had listed it for a price far below its renovated value, desperate to unload the monument to their humiliation. It had sold for a loss, after factoring in the original purchase price and closing costs. "I heard that too," Curtis replied, his voice neutral. He felt no triumph, no schadenfreude. He just felt distant from it all. "And your ex-wife?" Marcus asked gently. "She moved to Atlanta, I think," Curtis said. "Took a job there. We haven't spoken since the papers were signed." He had heard she was living in a small, expensive apartment, trying to rebuild her life, no longer propped up by the illusion of family wealth. He wished her no ill will. He simply wished her out of his life. And she was. "You know," Curtis said, looking out at the sun-dappled street, "for a long time I let them define my worth. I let a number, my salary, become the measure of who I was. I bought into their game, thinking if I just spent enough, worked hard enough, I could earn their respect. He took another sip of beer. I was wrong. Their respect was never on the table. It was a moving target, designed to keep me feeling indebted, to keep me small. The poor one wasn't about money. It was about power. They wanted me to feel powerless. He looked at his own hands, calloused from the sander, strong and capable. The real wealth was never the $132,000. That was just my savings. The real wealth was the knowledge in my head, the skills in my hands, the license in my wallet. It was the integrity, Marcus, that you reminded me I had. The ability to build something solid, something real, whether it's a house or a life. This is the core of it, isn't it? True wealth is not the money you have, but the value you create and the self-respect you refuse to surrender. It's the peace that comes from living an authentic life, built on your own terms. Curtis learned that true love and family can't be bought, and they certainly don't come with a price tag attached. They are built on a foundation of mutual respect, something far more valuable than a house in North Hills. What did you think of Curtis's journey from humiliation to liberation? We believe everyone has a story of overcoming and finding their true worth. Join the Love Beyond Pride community by subscribing and share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their own power. Your next chapter is waiting to be written.